the level of unfairness for a perfect conversation with the president of Ukraine. This was a perfect conversation. There was nothing done wrong. This is a hoax. This is a disgrace that this could happen in our country.
President Trump this afternoon still obviously on defense regarding impeachment and still insisting that any mention of impeachment is a disgrace, a hoax, even un-American. Now, Trump's supporters in Congress clearly don't think much of impeachment either. More than 30 Republicans, they stormed the secure room where impeachment witnesses were testifying, and they did so with the full support, it turns out, of the president. Now, they're complaining about the process, especially the closed-door hearings. But the rules, they're on the side of the Democrats here. Even Fox's legal analyst, again, Fox News Channel, agrees the process is sound.
As frustrating as it may be to have these hearings going on behind closed doors, the hearings over which Congressman Schiff is presiding, they are consistent with the rules.
They can make any rules they want.
Well, they can't change the rules. They follow the rules. And when were the rules written? Last? In January of 2015. And who signed them? John Boehner. And who enacted them? A Republican majority.
Now, there are important lessons about impeachment, how and why it's used, and the impeachment process itself. And all of those lessons, they can be found in our history. Now, our founding fathers insisted that impeachment be in the Constitution, remembering their troubles with the British kings. They singled out foreign influence in our government as a particular focus, and they wrote impeachment into both Articles 1 and 2 of the Constitution. In a new book, it talks about all of that and more. It's called High Crimes and Misdemeanors, A History of Impeachment for the Age of Trump. The author, Frank Bowman, he's law professor at the University of Missouri. Frank, thank you very much for the time. And sometimes I'm amazed at the foresight of the founding fathers. Not only all the different provisions, but what they anticipated. And they specifically recognized the concerns of foreign involvement in our own elections. And they saw that obviously as something of a paramount concern.
Yes, they certainly did. Now, of course, in adopting impeachment into our Constitution, they were, of course, building on an institution that had been created by the British beginning in the 14th century. Now, of course, interestingly, at the time the framers were designing the Constitution, to a certain extent, the power relationships tended to be inverted. They were concerned an awful lot about the fact that there were a lot of very powerful European countries who might be trying to intrude into our political space when we were a very young and very weak country. Of course, now the tables have turned to some degree, and we are, of course, the predominant country in the world, in power in the world. And in the case of Mr. Trump and Ukraine, some of the meddling and some of the power relationship is going the other way. But the concern about foreign intervention, the concern about foreign influence in American elections has remained the same.
You make the point, I've seen, that the way when people hear the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors, it's not what they think it is. It doesn't mean that it has to be by definition a high crime, for example. Talk about how perception and reality are different in terms of the standard.
Well, when a modern American reads the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors, the thing that immediately leaps to mind is crimes of the ordinary sort, the kinds of things that you get charged with in a criminal court and can go to jail for. High crimes sounds like serious crimes. Misdemeanors in our modern language, it just means less serious crimes. And so we tend to say, well, the words say crime, so there must be some violation of the statute somewhere before we can impeach someone. But of course, that's not what the framers meant. They took this phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors, from British practice. Parliament had been using this exact phrase to describe the kinds of things they impeach people for since as early as 1386. And when the framers adopted that phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors, they realized they were getting what a lawyer would call a term of art. You don't read the phrase word by word. You read it recognizing that it meant something, something rather special to Parliament. It meant something actually to Americans before the Constitutional Convention, and the something that it meant was a broad range of bad conduct, which sometimes included crimes, but more particularly included the sorts of behavior that really, in the president's case, undermined his legitimacy as an office holder or presented a real risk to the country and to its constitutional values.
Frank, when you put this book together, did you have a good sense about what was in the mind of the framers in terms of how they envisioned the republic? And I say that because the president clearly doesn't view our setup as co-equal branches of government. And in fact, just this week he said, or his attorneys did, not only could he shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue, but he would face no penalty for it, and in the law enforcement wouldn't even be able to stop him even if they were present at the case. I can't imagine that's how the Founding Fathers envisioned the powers of the executive branch, because to me that sounds like a king without any checks and balances.
That's exactly what it does sound like, and that's exactly what the framers decided not to have. They considered actually having a king. Alexander Hamilton and others were kind of in favor of that. But they decided definitely not to have a king. And what's more, they imagined that the natural predominant branch of American government would be the legislature. They rather thought that the presidency would be a rather weak branch. Now, of course, in the next 2 centuries, the tables turned and the presidency is quite powerful. But the notion that the framers ever thought that a president was a kind of a godlike figure who couldn't be brought to heel by the law is simply not supported by anything that the framers thought or anything that they wrote, and certainly isn't demonstrated or illustrated by anything in our history since that time.
You reference in your book, obviously, the parallels to Watergate, and you, in saying in the articles that could be drawn up for impeachment, abuse of power seems to be the most consumable, certainly by the public. There will be some additional articles that would be drawn up. But you say when the comparison to Watergate's penny ante compared to the allegations that this president could be facing.
Well, penny ante might have been a little bit of hyperbole. I said that in a newspaper article, but but here's what I was thinking when I said it. With respect to Richard Nixon, he engaged in obstruction of justice. He engaged in various abuses of power. And he did so largely to try to gather information on his political enemies to gain advantage in an upcoming election, and then later on to cover up the bad things that he and his minions did in order to achieve those objectives. But all of those things were domestic. They were self-interested, but there was nothing like what Mr. Trump did with respect to Ukraine, which is of a different order, in the sense that an American president invoked all the powers of not just the presidency, but all the powers of our massively powerful country, and brought it to bear on a country, Ukraine. And Mr. Trump demanded that the president of that country do him a political favor to help him get reelected, and said that if in essence, if the president didn't do that, the president of Ukraine didn't do that, then we would withdraw our help from this incredibly vulnerable country. That is, in my view, certainly at least as bad as anything that Richard Nixon did, and I would say a good deal worse.
I've had lawmakers on the show, Democrats, who seem legitimately conflicted in terms of what articles to pursue, meaning not so much that they struggle with the premise of abuse of power, but should it be singular to the Ukraine incident, or should it be about a pattern of behavior? And also, what's consumable for the public? Do you have thoughts on how they should proceed? Because certainly if you take the 3 years in totality, there's lots of examples of abuse of power. It's not limited to the phone call and then what happened after the fact. Or maybe has it become too dense if they go back over a series of time rather than this call and the immediate aftermath?
They've got a couple of problems. One of them is that there is a wide variety of things that you could include in articles of impeachment, even if you're restraining the articles of impeachment to abuse of power. But they have a time problem. They need to move this thing along to bring it to a head. There is an election coming, and certainly Mr. Trump's efforts and those of his supporters are going to be to drag this thing out so that no action is possible until, on or after the date of the election. There's that problem. And there's also the problem of simply explaining things to the public. I think the Ukraine case is very simple. It's easy to explain. And moreover, the facts are clear and becoming clearer. And the people who are coming forward to talk about those facts are some of the best public servants of this generation. If impeachment is to be successful, either in terms of getting the necessary votes or in moving the country, it has to be about something that seems serious, that can be that the public understands as being serious, so that legislatures can explain it to their constituents, and their constituents will, in the end, support it.
The book is, and it's a timely one, High Crimes and Misdemeanors, A History of Impeachment for the Age of Trump. Frank Bowman. Professor, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we will shift gears and we will remember Elijah Cummings. Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and others, they eulogized the late Maryland congressman. Today, we're going to show you what they said.